When MediBang Pro was released on January 11 of this year, it was met with mixed response. Some people were pretty hyped for it, and some weren't exactly happy with the release, as it was going to be an iOS-only app on release, and it looked like Procreate, causing some to deem the software as a contender to Procreate. However, the devs later announced that the software would also come to Android and Windows eventually in the future, meaning that they aren't going to be left out and ignored. But this will mean that the devs will have to take more time to get the software ready for release. As of this video's production, and probably its release, the beta for Android is being prepared to be out by this May. I may not have an exact reason as to why they would release the product on iOS at first, but I do have some assumptions as to why they would do so. iOS would be ideal to release at first, as it's easier to develop apps, which would save lots of time and money for the devs. iOS would take less time and money to design, create, and maintain compared to an Android app. And it's especially easy for developers who use Apple's programming language, Swift, as it's easier to use and allows less code to work with, meaning the devs can spend less time to develop the software. With Android, although more developer-friendly for allowing more freedom in terms of where the app can be programmed on, like Linux, Windows, or Mac, while iOS is usually being developed through a Mac OS computer. But the thing about Android is that it has numerous different operating softwares. So Android would take longer to develop, as the devs would need to work on getting the app ready to use on most Android OSs. These separate OSs also don't have updates coming out at the same time, and if they do come, the developers have to spend more time and money updating the app for numerous different OSs, which would take more time and money to develop. Now, these are just some of the pros and cons of developing software for iOS and Android, and I'm not exactly a person who is qualified to talk about this, but this is to help give an idea on why Android's version of MediBang Pro is going to take a little longer to be made. If you want further info on this, feel free to read articles on app development for iOS and Android online, and as for developing on Windows, the main point that I found was that Mac's software development infrastructure is just better built for programming software and allows developers to develop any software for any platform, while Windows is solely restricted to Windows and Android. Keep in mind, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just trying to explore why the devs would choose iOS to develop first, as well as to help give more people insight onto why they would do this. If you want to learn more about this topic, best you look it up online and read for yourself, since as I've said for the 400th time, I'm not qualified to even talk about this. The software isn't exactly perfect, but it isn't the worst. To know if something is an issue for people using the software, they need to receive feedback from their users. I'm sure that they did get feedback from the beta, but that isn't going to be enough to ensure that the app provides the best experience possible for its users. And of course, the beta is not exactly the finished product, and when the finished product is released, they need to know what their community thinks. That way they can improve the user experience. So the devs released the app when they felt that it was usable and stable for launch. They were likely developing this for iOS first to lay some groundwork for the software, so that way they would know what they want to work with, and they would take it to Android later when they felt the software was ready, and then focus to get it ready for other platforms. If they waited to get everything out at once, everything would have been an absolute mess. Android and Windows would probably be not as ready as iOS, and it would take longer to get those issues patched. If you're a gamer, especially on your phone or tablet, You probably knew that Warzone Mobile was released last month on iOS and Android, and as seen by numerous players, the game was in desperate need of further fixing before it could even be suitable for launch. iOS could run the game fairly, but Android had way more problems, especially on gaming phones, which run Android operating software. Anyway, why did I bring that up? Well, to further explain my point. Just because it's ready for one platform doesn't mean that it's going to be ready for other platforms. If they released it for iOS, Android, and Windows at the same time, then this would result in an absolute mess, because one platform would probably be more ready than the others, and people would hate the software even more than they hate it as of now. Now, of course, when MediBang Pro released on iPad, it didn't receive the best reception, but it did allow the developers to receive feedback from their users to try and improve it, especially helping them take notes for when they'll soon release the software to Android and Windows. Releasing MediBang Pro on iOS first was probably the smart thing for them to do, as it allows them to get feedback so they can take notes on what to fix, add, or have in mind for when they release the software to other platforms when the software is hopefully ready by launch. The software is far from perfect and definitely needs to have some things that they have to add in or fix, but to know what needs fixing or should be added in, they have to ask their community for feedback so they know what they should add, fix, or have in mind. MediBang is run by supposedly 50 employees, according to the company. They aren't exactly big, and it takes a lot of work to put together any software of any kind. The company's size will mean a bigger workload, but the developers are doing their best to try and get the software to be as good as they can make it. And yeah, they could hire more people, but more isn't always better. Just because there are more people working in one company doesn't mean that the production and output will increase. If the company hires more people, especially too many people, then productivity can go down and profits would also follow suit. To keep the company going and to keep working on the software, they have to ensure that they have a steady flow of income to keep the company running. But they also need enough of their employees' productivity to allow output to obtain income from users so they can pay their employees and fund the software. If they just add more employees, they have to pay more people, and not all those people are going to be productive, so the company would just end up losing money. It's an economics thing, which I'm also not the best person suited to explain this, but it's a bit of a basic concept to get a hold of. More in economics doesn't exactly mean more productivity or profit, but what the company has to try and do is find some point that lets them maximize their profits, but at the same time, have enough people working so the company can put out their products for the public to purchase and consume. Holy shit, I actually learned some stuff in economics. Even though the team is pretty small and development may take longer, it does allow more productivity from the employees who will work their hardest on getting the software out or improve it, but still allow the company to gain profit. So those were some of the ideas that I had on why they would release the software on iOS only at first, and probably explain why they did so. I may not have been providing the best explanations, and I might not be correct, which if I'm wrong and if you think you can provide a better explanation, you can feel free to comment down below and elaborate why. Hi, Editor Mid here. So while I was going to prepare the video to be up earlier, while I was finishing up the final cut, I looked back at the tweet that mentioned they had less than 50 employees and updated people on the Android release for MediBang Pro. To add to my first point of the app being easier to develop for iOS, I should add that the app was made on iOS first for the Japanese market on release, as most of the Japanese market is iOS. which explained their main reason for the app releasing on iOS, as they're a Japanese indie company. So yeah, I overlooked this tweet by a long one, and I could be incorrect on some of the things that I've said previously, which if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But hopefully I could give some further insight into other factors outside of the market, so hopefully other people will understand why and don't get so pissy about the release of the app being on iOS first, which is why I chose to make this video. Anyway, sorry for the sudden delay, I'll get out of your hair now, enjoy the rest of the video. With the app only on iOS as of now, is it great? Well, in my experience, not exactly. I may not have used the software a lot because, of course, Procreate, but it's workable. What I like about the software is that it has MediBang's brushes, which feel great to use. The interface is way more simplified to use, which is great for people beginning to draw digitally compared to an incredibly cluttered interface of the original app, and it's a one-time purchase, so you don't have to worry about paying a subscription, and there's 0 ads. But my current gripes with the software is the simplified interface, which isn't favorable to my taste. I personally liked the cluttered look of the original better. Another issue that I have is that you also cannot edit any settings in the home screen of the app. You cannot connect your MediBang account to the app, there's not a lot of room to customize your brushes, and some features in MediBang Paint aren't in MediBang Pro, like being able to record time lapses. And the guides can feel like a gripe to use for the first time, as you have to open a menu to change the location or direction of the guides, and editing the guides was way faster in the original MediBang Paint since there was already a button to edit the guide's direction or location when you activated the guide, and the only time you ever needed to open a menu was if you wanted to change your guide from like a straight line to an ellipse. On MediBang Pro, if you want to rotate or change the way your guide is, everything is going to be done in a single menu, and it is freaking annoying. The original way of using the guides in MediBang Paint was so much faster and easier to use than MediBang Pro's way. Although it's nice that they're trying to organize a very cluttered software, it just feels like too much at times, and it feels unnecessary to do some of the things that they do in MediBang Pro. For the guides, they should have probably kept the way that they did it in the original MediBang app, and having to edit the guide is sometimes like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Having some organization is nice, but if you overdo it, everything's an absolute mindfuck to navigate. For some ideas on what the devs should do with the software, I think it would be nice to have more options to change your interface to a little more cluttered setup or a simple setup, so advanced users could still feel like they're using MediBang and have some of the options that they liked from the cluttered interface, but also have some organization like keeping the brush folders, but allow a simple interface too, so beginners won't feel too overwhelmed when they pick up the software. Some of the organization also feels too unnecessary, like with the guides, so it's not comfortable for anyone who likes having something you can almost instantly access. Not everything in MediBang Paint is in MediBang Pro, such as the time-lapse feature, or logging into your MediBang account, so in a way it's somewhat of a downgrade as it is a bit of an upgrade. But they should add these features sometime as they continue updating the software, which should make the things I said relevant to the app in due time. Hopefully. Overall, should you get the software now? I'd say probably not. You want to have the best drawing experience on whatever you're using, probably just best to stick to whatever you're using on whatever you're drawing, or just look into more software or hardware. I'm definitely going to still use Procreate despite a bit of a love-hate relationship I have with it, but it's more comfortable, easier, and flexible for anybody to use, which is definitely more bang for your buck with that extra dollar to pay to use it. Some features in MediBang Pro are also not for everybody, like some may be turned away when learning you have to save your own works manually, and the canvas doesn't auto-rotate to what you want when you leave the canvas. So when drawing on MediBang Pro, be sure you know how you have your canvas set to how you want it and where you should draw, because you don't want your work to be upside down or on its side when you want it to be upright. So you have to be careful when setting up your canvas. Also, MediBang Pro is only on iOS as of now, and knowing Procreate is on iOS, it makes MediBang Pro feel pointless to get. It costs about $1 less than Procreate, but there's no point in getting it right now unless you're a MediBang person more than a Procreate person, or you're more of a Clip Studio Paint person, or an Ibis Paint person, or whatever software is out there. Just stick to whatever you're comfortable with. If anything, the app is alright. It's got its ups and downs, which are hopefully going to be improved in the future, especially with release for other devices. But you probably shouldn't get it now. Just wait for the release for Windows or Android, and then see what you think when they release. At first, I considered the software was released too early, but looking at it now, I don't exactly think so. As of this video, I think if the software is a success on Android and Windows, then maybe I would probably consider the software was probably ahead of its time, but it just needs to prove itself now. This app could be a great Procreate alternative to non-iOS users, and would especially be nice for Android users who seek a good drawing software, but the devs have to work to prove that it can become that. Anyway, I could close the video now, but I want to talk about one more thing in regards to the software, being that threats were made towards the developers. Some people were supposedly sending threats and hate mail to the developers through their site form, which is clearly not okay to do. If you want the software released, it's best that you wait until it releases. If the devs rush the software will be an absolute piece of shit and could flop, preventing people from actually getting anything out of the software. If you are one of those people doing so, sending threats and hate mail to the developers, my question for you is, what the fuck are you thinking? If you care about the software, just be patient. Just like any form of media, it takes time for it to be made so it can be used. It's not like you'll explode if the software doesn't release. Quality is an important thing for products, and I'm sure you'd rather use a product that took time to be usable rather than something that isn't. Warzone Mobile. Also, you people should seriously seek mental help if you're this insane to send threats to the developers. And if you're not happy with the software, leave it alone, wait it out, or just ignore it overall. This is still a new software and is taking a little longer to develop on other platforms, and it isn't exactly easy to develop something for one platform and just put it out for another. Just be patient, and the software will come out soon sometime. And if you don't like it, that's absolutely fine, just leave it alone. Anyway, with that out of the way now, I can now close the video. I've barely seen any videos about the software as of now, and I want to incite further discussion on this software as I barely see anything, especially discussions about MediBang Pro online. I've had a bit of discussion with a friend of mine on the software in the past, but that's not going to be enough for me or for anyone. It's just too soon to just close the discussion for the software, and the devs would probably be helped further from seeing further discussion on the software so they know what needs work for the software to be better. I also ended up learning why the company likely chose to put the software out for iOS first and wanted to share the info along for people who probably don't understand and would most likely benefit from knowing why so they can understand the developers a little more. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and share the video with others to let them know about this topic. You can also discuss your ideas or thoughts on the software in the comments, Subscribing is optional and free. It's not really necessary, but it's nice to do so if you want to support me, but probably don't expect much from me as of now, as I'm struggling to think of some art-related content to put out. My socials are in my Linktree link. Check it out and follow me on Twitter or Instagram to further support me, or for seeing my art, or any random shit post on Twitter, or even have me draw for you. Anyway, thanks for watching. This is Midnight, and I'll see you all next time. This is likely because I don't use the software a lot, but I've been confused on where I want. So those were some basic ideas I have on why they would release the software on iOS only at first, and could probably explain why they did so. I may not have been the best at providing the best explanation. Find a point where is to at least find some point where they can maximize their profits, but also get enough of their as it allowed them to get feedback to take notes on what to fix, add, or have in mind for when they will release it on other platforms.